I never imagined that 8 simple words whispered to my 6-year-old daughter would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and myself. "Your mommy doesn't love you like I do," Patricia Martinez said, her voice dripping, with false sweetness as she tucked Sophia into bed during what I believed was a helpful grandmother's visit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Patricia didn't know was that my children had grown tired of her constant criticism and had secretly started recording her conversations on Lucas's tablet. What they captured that night would expose years of manipulation and ultimately transform our family in ways none of us could have predicted. The evening started like any other Thursday in our Cedar Valley home on Maple Street. David was working late again at his accounting firm, a pattern that had become so routine I'd stopped asking when he'd be home. Patricia had offered to help with dinner and bedtime, something that should have felt like a blessing for any exhausted mother juggling 2 young children, a part-time job at the local library, and the endless demands of household management. Instead, her presence filled me with a familiar tension that I'd learned to swallow down and ignore. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard Sophia crying from her bedroom upstairs. Not the dramatic wails of a tantrum, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs that every mother instinctively recognizes as genuine distress. I dried my hands quickly and headed toward the stairs, but Patricia's voice stopped me in the hallway. "Don't coddle her, Jessica. She needs to learn that tears won't get her everything she wants." Her tone carried that particular brand of authority that mothers-in-law seem to master, the kind that makes you question your own instincts while simultaneously making your skin crawl. But Sophia's crying intensified, and maternal instinct overrode social politeness. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and found my daughter curled up in her pink comforter, her small body shaking with suppressed sobs. When she saw me, she launched herself into my arms with desperate relief. "Mommy, Grandma Patricia said you don't really love me. She said you're just pretending because you have to." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my vision blur with sudden tears. I held Sophia tighter, stroking her dark hair while my mind raced. This wasn't the first time Patricia had made subtle comments about my parenting, but speaking directly to my children, undermining my relationship with them, crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. "That's not true, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "Mommy loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Grandma Patricia was wrong to say that." But even as I comforted my daughter, I felt something crack inside my chest, a foundation of trust and family unity that I'd taken for granted. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his 8-year-old face serious beyond his years. He was holding his tablet, the one David had bought him for educational games, and his expression told me he'd heard everything. "She said mean things to me, too, Mom," he admitted quietly. "She told me you were lazy, and that's why Dad has to work so much. She said other moms cook better food and keep their houses cleaner." His matter-of-fact delivery made the words even more devastating. The casual cruelty of adult criticism filtered through a child's innocent repetition. After tucking both children back into bed with extra hugs and reassurances, I went downstairs to confront Patricia. She was sitting at my kitchen table, calmly sipping tea from my favorite mug, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. When I entered the room, she looked up with the serene expression of someone who believed she'd done nothing wrong. "The children are finally settled," she said with satisfaction. "They needed a firm hand. You're too soft with them, Jessica. That's why they're so emotional and demanding." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in gaslighting disguised as concern. Patricia insisted she was only trying to help, that someone needed to teach my children proper discipline and realistic expectations. When I told her about Sophia's tears and Lucas's hurt feelings, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her manicured hand. "Children exaggerate everything. They probably misunderstood what I said. Besides, they need to hear some hard truths. about life. You can't shelter them forever with your permissive parenting style. Every word she spoke felt like a carefully aimed dart, designed to hit my deepest insecurities about motherhood. Had I been too lenient? Was I failing my children? By trying to balance kindness with structure, the doubt crept in like poison, the way it always did after Patricia's visits. She had a gift for identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them with surgical precision, all while maintaining the facade of a concerned grandmother who only wanted what was best for the family. When David finally came home at nearly 10 o'clock, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at my cold cup of coffee and trying to process what had happened. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his usually neat hair disheveled, from running his hands through it. "Sorry I'm so late," he said, kissing the top of my head absently. "The Henderson account is turning into a nightmare. How did everything go with Mom?" I opened my mouth to tell him about the evening's events, but Patricia emerged from the living room where she'd been watching television, her timing perfectly calculated. "Oh, David, honey, you look so tired. Jessica and I had a lovely evening. With the children. Though I do think Lucas might benefit from some extra structure in his bedtime routine. Perhaps a consistent schedule would help with his attitude lately." Her voice was warm honey, concerned and loving, with just enough implied criticism to plant seeds of doubt without seeming overtly hostile. David nodded distractedly, already mentally reviewing his work problems. "Thanks for helping out, Mom. I know Jessica appreciates the support." He squeezed my shoulder, but his attention was clearly elsewhere. "I'm going to grab a shower and head to bed. Early meeting tomorrow." And just like that, the moment for explanation passed. Patricia smiled at me over David's shoulder, an expression that clearly communicated her victory. She knew I wouldn't create drama in front of my exhausted husband, wouldn't be the wife who complained about his mother's helpful visit. After Patricia left and David fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction from the evening. This pattern had been building for months, maybe even years, so gradually that I'd barely noticed the erosion of my confidence and peace in my own home. Patricia's visits always left me feeling inadequate and defensive, but I'd attributed those feelings to normal mother-in-law tensions, the kind that comedians made jokes about and women commiserated over coffee. But speaking directly to my children, telling them I didn't love them, accusing me of laziness and inadequate housekeeping, to 8-year-old Lucas, these weren't harmless family dynamics. These were deliberate attacks on my relationship with my children and my sense of self-worth as a mother. The realization felt like waking up from a long, confusing dream to find yourself somewhere completely unexpected. The next morning brought the usual chaos of getting 2 children ready for school, packing lunches, finding missing homework, and mediating sibling disputes over bathroom time. But underneath the familiar routine, I noticed subtle changes in Lucas and Sophia's behavior. They were quieter than usual, more clingy, seeking extra reassurance about ordinary things. Sophia asked 3 separate times if I really loved her breakfast choice. Lucas wanted confirmation that his backpack was packed correctly, that his clothes looked nice, that I wasn't disappointed in him for forgetting to brush his teeth the first time. These small moments of insecurity broke my heart in ways that Patricia's direct criticism of me never could. My children, who had always been confident and secure in our family's love, were now second-guessing themselves and seeking constant validation. The damage wasn't just to my relationship with them, but to their fundamental sense of security and self-worth. That realization ignited something fierce and protective in my chest, a maternal fury that I'd never experienced before. During my lunch break at the library, I called my friend Amanda Foster, another mother from Sophia's kindergarten class who had become a trusted confidant over the past year. Amanda was one of those rare friends who listened without judgment and offered perspective without trying to fix everything. When I told her about the previous evening, she was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Jessica, what you're describing isn't normal grandmother behavior. That's emotional manipulation targeted at children. Have you considered that this might be part of a larger pattern? Her words struck me like lightning, illuminating connections I hadn't previously made. Patricia's constant subtle criticisms of my cooking, my housekeeping, my parenting choices. Her way of offering help that somehow always made me feel more inadequate rather than supported. Her habit of contradicting my parenting decisions in front of the children, then acting confused when I tried to address it. The way she always seemed to visit when David was working late, when I was most stressed and least able to present a composed front. That afternoon, when I picked up the children from school, Lucas approached me with his tablet in hand and an expression of determination that reminded me of David when he was solving a particularly complex problem. "Mom, I need to show you something," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure Sophia was out of earshot. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've been recording Grandma Patricia when she says mean things to us. I thought maybe you should hear what she says when you're not in the room. My 8-year-old son had been carrying this burden alone, smart enough to recognize that something was wrong, but too young to fully understand the adult dynamics at play. The fact that he'd taken it upon himself to gather evidence showed both his maturity and the extent to which Patricia's behavior had affected him. With shaking hands, I took the tablet and scrolled through several audio files, each labeled with dates from Patricia's recent visits. The recordings were devastating in their clarity. Patricia's voice, sweet and grandmotherly when addressing the children directly, followed by cruel commentary clearly intended for their impressionable ears. "Your mother is too weak to discipline you properly. That's why your father works so much to get away from the chaos at home. Other children have mothers who care about their appearance. Your mother has given up trying to look nice for your father. If you lived with me, you'd have proper meals instead of this processed food your mother serves because she's too lazy to cook." Each file contained variations on the same themes: systematic undermining of my authority, my competence, my love for my children. But what made it even more chilling was the calculated nature of it all. Patricia was careful never to make these comments when David or I were within earshot, timing her poison perfectly for maximum impact with minimum accountability. She was deliberately damaging my children's sense of security and their relationship with me, all while maintaining plausible deniability. Listening to those recordings felt like discovering that someone had been slowly poisoning my family's well water. The damage was insidious, building up over time in ways that were difficult to identify or address directly. But now I had proof. Concrete evidence of what I'd sensed but couldn't quite articulate. The relief of validation was immediately followed by a crushing wave of guilt. How long had my children been carrying this burden? How much damage had been done while I remained oblivious? That evening, after dinner and homework were finished, I sat down with Lucas and Sophia for the most difficult conversation I'd ever had as a parent. I needed to acknowledge what had happened without frightening them further, to validate their experiences without destroying their relationship with their grandmother entirely. Children deserve honesty, but they also deserve protection from adult complexities that they're not equipped to handle. I listened to the recordings on Lucas's tablet. I began carefully, watching their faces for signs of distress. "I want you both to know that what Grandma Patricia said to you was wrong and unfair. Grown-ups sometimes say things that hurt people's feelings, and that's not okay, even when the grown-up is someone we love." Sophia curled up closer to me on the couch, while Lucas maintained his serious expression, clearly relieved that the truth was finally being acknowledged. "Are you going to tell Daddy?" Sophia asked, her voice small and uncertain. The question revealed another layer of the problem. Patricia had created an environment where the children felt they couldn't trust their father to protect them from his mother's criticism. They'd internalized the idea that keeping peace in the family was more important than their own emotional safety, a burden no child should carry. Yes, sweetie. Daddy needs to know what happened so we can make sure everyone in our family feels safe and loved. I pulled both children closer, feeling the weight of responsibility for healing not just their immediate hurt, but the longer-term damage to their sense of security and trust. And I want you both to know that you can always tell me when someone says something that makes you feel bad, even if that person is part of our family. Your feelings matter, and it's my job to keep you safe. The conversation with David would have to wait until after the children were asleep, but I spent the rest of the evening observing my family with new eyes. Patricia's manipulation had created subtle fissures in our foundation that I was only beginning to understand. David's long work hours, which I'd attributed to career ambition and financial responsibility, suddenly seemed like possible avoidance of a home environment that his mother had systematically undermined. My own increasing anxiety and self-doubt around my parenting choices made more sense when viewed as the intended result of a deliberate campaign of psychological manipulation. As I tucked the children into bed that night, giving extra hugs and reassurances, I made a silent promise to myself and to them. Whatever it took, however difficult the conversations ahead might be, I would not allow anyone to make my children question their worth or my love for them. The protective instinct that had driven me to comfort Sophia the night before had evolved into something more powerful, a determination to reclaim my family's peace and my own sense of competence as a mother. The recordings on Lucas's tablet weren't just evidence of Patricia's cruelty. They were a wake-up call that my passive approach to family conflict had inadvertently sacrificed my children's emotional well-being on the altar of keeping peace with my mother-in-law. That realization marked the end of my tolerance for behavior that I'd previously excused as personality differences or generational misunderstandings. Some lines, once crossed, demanded action rather than accommodation. Standing in my children's darkened hallway after finally getting them settled for the night, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who had spent years doubting her own perceptions and minimizing her concerns in order to maintain family harmony was giving way to someone fiercer and more certain. My children had shown remarkable courage in documenting the truth when the adults around them had failed to protect them. Now it was my turn to match their bravery with action. When David finally came upstairs at nearly midnight, I was sitting on the edge of our bed with Lucas's tablet in my hands, the weight of the recordings pressing down on me like a physical burden. He noticed my posture immediately, the way tension radiated from my shoulders, and his expression shifted from tired resignation to concerned alertness. "Jess, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. I'd seen the ghost of the marriage I thought we had, the family dynamics I'd believed were normal, the mother-in-law relationship I'd convinced myself was merely challenging rather than toxic. The recordings had stripped away years of careful self-deception and forced me to confront a reality I'd been too invested in our family's peace to acknowledge. "David, we need to talk about your mother." The words came out more bluntly than I'd intended, but there was no gentle way to begin this conversation. "There are things happening when you're not here, things that are affecting Lucas and Sophia in ways I don't think you understand." His immediate defensive posture told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation would unfold, but I pressed forward anyway. I handed him the tablet and watched his face as he scrolled through the audio files. The progression of emotions was painful to witness. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally a kind of hollow devastation that I'd never seen in my husband's eyes before. He listened to 3 complete recordings before setting the device aside and running both hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his response to overwhelming stress. "I don't understand," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's always been critical, but this..." He gestured helplessly toward the tablet. "She's talking to them like they're allies against you. She's trying to turn our children against their own mother." The betrayal in his voice wasn't directed at me, but at the shattering of his own illusions about his mother's character and motivations. What followed was the most honest conversation David and I had shared in years, maybe ever. He admitted that he'd noticed my increasing anxiety around his mother's visits, but had attributed it to normal family tensions. He'd seen the children's subdued behavior after Patricia's stays, but had assumed they were simply tired from the disruption to their routine. Most painfully, he acknowledged that his long work hours had become a way of avoiding the underlying tensions in our home, leaving me to navigate his mother's manipulation alone. "I kept telling myself that you two just needed time to work out your differences," he said, shame coloring his voice. "I thought if I stayed out of it, you'd eventually find common ground. I never imagined she was actively undermining you to our children. That's not the woman who raised me, Jess. Or maybe it is. And I just never wanted to see it." That last admission opened a floodgate of memories that David had apparently been suppressing for years. Stories of his childhood emerged, patterns of behavior that he'd normalized, but that now seemed disturbing in the context of Patricia's treatment of me and our children. The way she'd criticized his father until the man became a shadow of himself. Her habit of creating loyalty tests between family members, forcing people to choose sides in conflicts she manufactured. The subtle ways she'd undermined his relationships with girlfriends throughout high school and college. "She told me once that no woman would ever love me the way she did," David said, his voice hollow with recognition. "I thought it was just typical mother protectiveness. But now I'm wondering if she's been trying to sabotage our marriage from the beginning, so gradually that I couldn't see the pattern." The pieces were falling into place for both of us, years of seemingly isolated incidents revealing themselves as part of a deliberate campaign to maintain her position as the primary woman in her son's life. We talked until nearly 3 a.m, mapping out incidents and behaviors that made more sense in this new context. Patricia's insistence on long visits that coincided with David's busiest work periods. Her habit of rearranging my kitchen, and then commenting on how much better organized it was. The way she consistently offered help in forms that highlighted my inadequacies rather than genuinely supporting me. Her tendency to undermine my parenting decisions in subtle ways that left me questioning my own judgment. By the time we finally went to sleep, we'd made several difficult decisions. Patricia would no longer be allowed unsupervised time with the children. Her future visits would be limited and structured, with clear boundaries about appropriate behavior and conversation topics. Most importantly, David committed to being present and engaged during her visits, taking responsibility for managing his mother's behavior instead of leaving me to navigate it alone. But implementing these changes proved more complicated than we'd anticipated. When David called his mother the next evening to discuss new guidelines for her visits, Patricia's response was a masterclass in manipulation and deflection. She expressed hurt and confusion at the accusations, suggested that I was being overly sensitive and trying to turn David against her, and accused us of keeping her from her beloved grandchildren over trivial misunderstandings. "She's demanding to speak with you directly," David said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "She says there's obviously been some miscommunication, and she needs to clear the air." His expression was conflicted, torn between his lifetime of conditioning to please his mother and his newfound understanding of her manipulative tactics. I could see him wavering, wanting to believe that this was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be resolved with honest conversation. I took the phone, knowing that this conversation would define the boundaries of our relationship going forward. Patricia's voice was sickeningly sweet, the same tone she'd used while poisoning my children's minds about their mother. "Jessica, dear, David tells me there's been some confusion about my visits with the children. I'm sure we can work this out between us. You know how much I love Lucas and Sophia." The gaslighting was immediate and comprehensive. Patricia suggested that the children had misunderstood her words, that they were going through a phase of testing authority figures, that I was probably stressed and overreacting to normal grandparent guidance. She offered to be more careful about how she phrased suggestions in the future, while simultaneously implying that the real problem was my oversensitivity and lack of appreciation for her help. "Patricia," I interrupted, finding my voice stronger than I'd expected. "I have recordings of what you said to my children. There's no misunderstanding about telling Sophia that I don't love her, or telling Lucas that I'm lazy, and that's why David works so much. Those weren't suggestions or guidance. They were deliberate attempts to damage my relationship with my children." The silence that followed was deafening. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice had lost its saccharine quality and taken on an edge of barely controlled fury. "So you've been spying on me, recording private conversations with my grandchildren. What kind of paranoid behavior is that, Jessica? What does that say about your mental state?" The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. Patricia accused me of coaching the children to lie about her, of being an unfit mother who was so insecure that I couldn't handle normal family relationships, of manipulating David into choosing between his wife and his mother. Every criticism was designed to hit my deepest vulnerabilities, to make me question my own perceptions and feel guilty for protecting my children. But something had fundamentally changed in me during those sleepless hours of conversation with David. The woman who would have previously absorbed these attacks and wondered if there was truth in them was gone, replaced by someone who recognized manipulation when she heard it and refused to be gaslit into questioning her own reality. "The recordings speak for themselves, Patricia. Your relationship with our children will be supervised going forward, and these conversations about their mother need to stop completely." The phone call ended with Patricia in tears, claiming that we were breaking her heart and destroying her relationship with her only grandchildren. She accused me of turning David against her, of being vindictive and cruel, of using the children as weapons in a petty dispute. But beneath the tears and accusations, I heard something else. The rage of someone whose carefully constructed system of control was being dismantled. In the days that followed, Patricia launched what could only be described as a campaign to regain her position in our family hierarchy. She called David at work repeatedly, sometimes crying about how much she missed the children, sometimes expressing concern about my mental health and suggesting that I needed professional help. She sent cards and gifts to Lucas and Sophia, each accompanied by messages about how much Grandma missed them and hoped to see them soon. Most insidiously, she began reaching out to other family members and mutual friends, sharing her version of events in which I was a controlling, unstable wife who was keeping her from her grandchildren out of jealousy and spite. These conversations were carefully crafted to elicit sympathy and support, painting herself as a devoted grandmother being victimized by an unreasonable daughter-in-law. The campaign was more effective than I'd anticipated. David's sister called to express concern about the family drama and suggest that we might be overreacting to typical grandmother behavior. Several of Patricia's friends from church reached out to ask if there was anything they could do to help heal the family rift. Even some of our mutual acquaintances began treating me differently, with a kind of careful politeness that suggested they'd heard unflattering stories about my behavior. This phase of the conflict was perhaps the most isolating and demoralizing I'd experienced. While I'd expected Patricia to be angry about the new boundaries, I hadn't anticipated the systematic campaign to undermine my credibility and reputation within our extended social circle. The woman who had spent months poisoning my children's minds about their mother was now attempting to poison the minds of everyone around us about my character and mental stability. David struggled with the pressure from his extended family, torn between his loyalty to me and the children and his lifelong conditioning to maintain peace with his mother. "Maybe we could try a supervised visit," he suggested one evening after a particularly difficult phone call with his sister. "Just to show that we're willing to work things out. Maybe Mom has learned from this and things could be different." I understood his desire to believe that his mother could change, that our family could heal without the painful process of maintaining strict boundaries. But I'd seen too much, learned too much about Patricia's character and methods to believe that a supervised visit would result in genuine change rather than more sophisticated manipulation. David, this isn't about teaching her a lesson or giving her a chance to do better. This is about protecting our children from someone who deliberately tried to damage their relationship with their mother. That kind of behavior doesn't change because you get caught. The turning point came when Lucas approached me after school one day, his face troubled and his backpack dragging behind him. "Mom, Grandma Patricia called me at Jake's house today. She said she was so sad because we weren't allowed to see her anymore, and she asked if I missed her and if I thought you were being mean to her." The violation of our boundaries was stunning in its audacity, but what bothered me more was the burden it had placed on my 8-year-old son. "What did you tell her, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling down to his eye level. "I told her that you weren't being mean, that you were protecting us from feeling bad about ourselves. But then she started crying and said that I was breaking her heart, and I felt really guilty." His mature response to Patricia's manipulation filled me with pride and heartbreak in equal measure. My children had developed emotional intelligence and boundaries that the adults in their lives had failed to maintain. That evening, David and I made the decision to cut contact with Patricia completely until she acknowledged her behavior and committed to genuine change. We blocked her phone number, returned her gifts unopened, and made it clear to extended family members that we would not discuss the situation further. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying, like cutting away infected tissue to save the healthy parts of our family. The weeks that followed were a strange combination of peace and upheaval. Our home felt calmer without the threat of Patricia's visits, but we were dealing with the aftermath of her manipulation in ways I hadn't anticipated. Lucas and Sophia both needed reassurance that they weren't responsible for the family conflict, that protecting themselves from hurtful words wasn't selfish or wrong. They asked difficult questions about why grown-ups sometimes hurt people they're supposed to love, about whether Patricia really loved them if she said mean things about their mother. My own healing process was more complex than I'd expected. Years of subtle undermining had left me with deep-seated doubts about my competence as a mother, my worth as a person, my ability to accurately perceive reality. Even with Patricia out of our lives, I found myself second-guessing decisions that I would have made confidently before her campaign of psychological manipulation began. The damage hadn't been limited to my relationship with my children. It had infected my relationship with myself. David threw himself into repairing the trust he'd lost by failing to protect us from his mother's behavior. He took on more responsibilities. At home, made sure to be present for bedtime routines and weekend activities, and consistently reinforced my authority as a parent when the children tested boundaries. But I could see the guilt eating at him, the recognition that his avoidance and conflict-averse approach had left his family vulnerable to psychological abuse. One evening, as we sat together on the couch after the children had gone to bed, David turned to me with an expression of profound regret. "I keep thinking about all the times you tried to tell me something was wrong, all the times I dismissed your concerns as personality conflicts or sensitivity. I made you handle my mother's manipulation alone, and then I made you doubt your own perceptions when you couldn't articulate exactly what was happening." His acknowledgement meant more to me than he could have known. For years, I'd felt like I was going crazy, unable to explain why Patricia's helpful visits left me feeling inadequate and anxious, why her expressions of concern felt like attacks, why her presence in our home felt like an invasion rather than a blessing. David's recognition that my instincts had been correct all along helped begin the process of trusting myself again. But the real healing came from an unexpected source. While browsing the community bulletin board at the library during my lunch break, I noticed a flyer for a support group called Families in Transition that met weekly at the Willow Creek Wellness Center. The description mentioned helping families navigate difficult relationship dynamics and boundary-setting challenges. Something about the non-judgmental language and focus on practical solutions resonated with me in a way that traditional therapy hadn't. The decision to attend my first meeting felt monumental, like admitting that our family problems were serious enough to require outside help. I'd always prided myself on being able to handle challenges independently, on maintaining the appearance of a stable, happy family regardless of the underlying tensions. Walking into that circle of folding chairs felt like publicly acknowledging failure, but it also felt like the first step toward something better. The group was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 8 people of various ages, led by a gentle woman named Helen Thompson who had clearly navigated her own share of family difficulties. As we went around the circle introducing ourselves and sharing our current challenges, I was struck by how many of the stories echoed my own experience. Adult children struggling with manipulative parents, spouses caught between loyalty to their partners and family of origin, grandparents whose help consistently undermined rather than supported. When my turn came, I found myself sharing more than I'd intended about Patricia's systematic campaign against my relationship with my children, about David's well-intentioned but harmful avoidance of the conflict, about my own struggle to trust my perceptions and maintain my sense of self-worth. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, months of suppressed emotion and confusion finding voice in this safe space. The response from the group was immediate and validating. Several members nodded in recognition, sharing their own experiences with family members who used children as weapons in adult conflicts, who manufactured crises to maintain control, who presented themselves as victims when their manipulation was exposed. For the first time since this ordeal began, I didn't feel alone or crazy or unreasonably sensitive. Helen Thompson's guidance was particularly valuable in helping me understand the dynamics I'd been navigating. She explained how multi-generational family systems often include individuals who use emotional manipulation to maintain their position of power, how these patterns can persist for decades unless someone breaks the cycle, how protecting children from psychological abuse sometimes requires making difficult choices that feel disloyal or harsh. What you're describing isn't a personality conflict or a miscommunication, she said, after I'd shared the details of Patricia's behavior. It's a pattern of deliberate emotional abuse targeted at the most vulnerable members of your family. Your children's decision to document these conversations shows remarkable wisdom and courage. They recognized that something wrong was happening and took steps to protect themselves when the adults around them weren't able to do so effectively. Her words reframed my children's actions in a way that filled me with pride rather than guilt. Instead of seeing their recordings as evidence that I'd failed to protect them, I began to understand them as proof of their resilience and intelligence. They'd identified a threat to their emotional well-being and had taken appropriate action to address it, showing more clarity and courage than many adults manage in similar situations. Over the following weeks, the support group became a cornerstone of my healing process. Helen introduced concepts and strategies that helped me understand not just what had happened in our family, but why it had been so difficult to address effectively. I learned about gaslighting, triangulation, and other manipulation tactics that Patricia had used with surgical precision. I began to understand how my own conflict-avoidant tendencies and desire to maintain family harmony had made me vulnerable to these tactics. More importantly, I began to develop a toolkit for rebuilding my confidence and maintaining healthy boundaries going forward. The group provided a safe space to practice assertive communication, to role-play difficult conversations, to work through the guilt and self-doubt that Patricia's manipulation had instilled. Slowly, I began to trust my own perceptions again, to value my instincts as a mother, to believe that protecting my children from psychological harm was not only appropriate but necessary. The transformation wasn't immediate or linear. There were still days when I questioned whether we'd overreacted, whether Patricia's behavior had really been as harmful as we'd perceived, whether cutting contact with a grandmother who claimed to love the children was the right choice. But each time these doubts arose, I would remember the pain in Sophia's voice when she asked if I really loved her, the serious expression on Lucas's face as he documented his grandmother's cruelty, the systematic nature of Patricia's campaign against my relationship with my children. David began attending the support group with me after a few weeks, recognizing that his own healing process was essential to our family's recovery. Watching him grapple with the reality of his mother's behavior, seeing him work to understand how his avoidance had enabled her manipulation, witnessing his commitment to changing patterns that had damaged his family, deepened my respect for him and strengthened our marriage in unexpected ways. The children, meanwhile, continued to amaze me with their resilience and wisdom. They asked thoughtful questions about family relationships, expressed their feelings with remarkable clarity, and showed compassion for everyone involved even while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Their recovery seemed faster and more complete than my own. Perhaps because they hadn't spent decades learning to doubt their own perceptions and accommodate inappropriate behavior for the sake of family peace. 3 months into our new reality without Patricia's presence, I found myself experiencing moments of unexpected clarity and strength. The support group had become more than just a weekly gathering. It had evolved into a foundation for rebuilding my sense of self and my approach to family relationships. Helen Thompson's guidance had helped me recognize that healing from psychological manipulation required more than just removing the source of harm. It demanded actively reconstructing the confidence and self-trust that had been systematically eroded. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging session, where Helen asked each of us to identify one area of our lives where we'd allowed someone else's criticism to override our own judgment. For me, the answer was immediate and painful: my career. Before marriage, I'd been a passionate and successful interior designer, but Patricia's constant subtle criticisms about working mothers, combined with David's gentle discouragement about the stress of juggling career and family, had gradually convinced me to abandon my professional aspirations. I used to design spaces that made people feel peaceful and inspired, I found myself saying to the group. I had regular clients who trusted my vision, who valued my creativity. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that wanting a art career meant I was selfish, that being satisfied with part-time library work meant I was more devoted to my family. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, as if I was talking about someone else's life rather than my own. Helen leaned forward with interest. What happened to that part of you? The designer who created spaces that inspired people? Her question hit me like a physical blow because I realized I didn't know. That woman had been slowly erased, so gradually that I hadn't noticed her disappearance until she was completely gone. In her place was someone who apologized for taking up space, who second-guessed every decision, who measured her worth by her ability to avoid conflict and keep everyone else comfortable. After the meeting, I drove home through Cedar Valley's familiar streets, but instead of going directly to Maple Street, I found myself parked outside the new community center that had been under construction for the past year. The building was nearly complete, with large windows facing the street and a sign advertising their upcoming grand opening. On impulse, I walked around the perimeter, noting the bland, institutional interior visible through the windows. The space had good bones but no soul, the kind of sterile environment that made people want to leave rather than linger and connect. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old design portfolio. The leather binder was dusty and forgotten, buried beneath photo albums and children's artwork in our bedroom closet. As I flipped through the pages, I was struck by the quality and creativity of my previous work. These weren't the amateur efforts of someone playing at interior design. They were the professional accomplishments of someone with genuine talent and vision. David found me at the kitchen table hours later, surrounded by sketches and fabric samples I'd saved from past projects. "What's all this?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me with genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive tone I'd expected. The change in his attitude since Patricia's removal from our lives had been profound. as if her absence had allowed him to rediscover aspects of me he'd forgotten existed. "I was looking at my old work," I said, feeling simultaneously proud and vulnerable. I'd forgotten how much I loved creating spaces that made people feel welcome and inspired. I think I gave up too much of myself trying to be the perfect wife and mother. The admission felt dangerous, like confessing to a crime I wasn't sure I'd actually committed. David studied the portfolio pages with careful attention, examining each project as if seeing my work for the first time. "These are incredible, Jess. This restaurant design, the way you used color and texture to create different moods in each section. I remember when you finished this project. You were so excited, so energized. I haven't seen you that passionate about anything in years." His observation stung because it was accurate, but also because it revealed how much of my authentic self I'd sacrificed without realizing it. The conversation that followed was different from any we'd had during our marriage. Instead of discussing logistics or family schedules, we talked about dreams, aspirations, and the ways we'd both allowed fear and external pressure to limit our choices. David admitted that his own career had become a refuge from family tensions, a place where he could feel competent and successful without navigating the minefield of interpersonal relationships at home. "I think I used work as an escape," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "It was easier to solve accounting problems than to deal with the fact that my mother was systematically undermining my wife and children. I told myself I was providing for the family, but really I was avoiding the family." His honesty created space for my own admissions about how I'd used perfectionism and people-pleasing as shields against criticism and conflict. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I called the community center and asked to speak with whoever was in charge of the interior design for their new building. After being transferred several times, I found myself talking to Margaret Chen, the facility director, who sounded harried and slightly desperate when I mentioned my design background. "We're supposed to open in 6 weeks, and the interior still looks like a hospital waiting room," she confessed. "Our original designer flaked out last month, and the board is panicking about the grand opening. Do you have any experience with public spaces?" Her question opened a door I'd thought was permanently closed, offering an opportunity to step back into my professional identity after years of dormancy. I arranged to meet Margaret at the community center that afternoon, bringing my portfolio and a notebook full of ideas that had been percolating since my impromptu visit the previous day. Walking through the empty building, I felt something awakening inside me that I'd almost forgotten existed. The space had tremendous potential, with soaring ceilings and abundant natural light, but it lacked the warmth and character that would make it truly welcoming to the diverse community it was meant to serve. "What's your vision for how people will use this space?" I asked Margaret as we stood in the main lobby. The question was one I'd asked countless clients in my previous career, but it felt new and exciting after so many years away from professional design work. Her answer revealed a woman who understood community building, but needed help translating that understanding into physical space. "We want it to feel like the heart of Cedar Valley," she said, gesturing toward the various rooms that would house different programs. "A place where families feel comfortable bringing children, where seniors want to gather for activities, where teenagers don't feel out of place. But I look at these white walls and industrial flooring, and I have no idea how to make that happen." Her vulnerability and trust in sharing her vision with me felt like a gift, an opportunity to contribute something meaningful after months of feeling professionally irrelevant. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the space, taking measurements and making notes about lighting, traffic flow, and the emotional impact of different design choices. For the first time in years, I felt completely present and engaged, my mind working at full capacity as I considered how color, texture, and furniture placement could transform this institutional shell into a warm, welcoming community hub. That evening, I worked until nearly midnight creating a preliminary design proposal, something I hadn't done since my early career when I was hungry for new projects and willing to work for minimal compensation just to build my portfolio. The difference was that now I understood the value of what I was offering, the skill and creativity required to transform space in ways that served both functional and emotional needs. The proposal I presented to Margaret the following week was comprehensive, addressing everything from color schemes that would appeal to multiple age groups to furniture arrangements that would facilitate both intimate conversations and larger group activities. I'd researched local artisans who could provide custom pieces that would support the community while adding unique character to the space. Most importantly, I'd created a design that honored the center's mission while staying within their modest budget. Margaret's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, studying the detailed plans and material samples I'd prepared. "You've captured what we wanted to achieve but couldn't articulate. When can you start?" The question sent a jolt of excitement and terror through my system. Starting meant committing to a level of professional engagement I hadn't maintained in years, but it also meant reclaiming a part of myself that I'd thought was lost forever. The project timeline was aggressive, requiring me to coordinate with contractors, vendors, and volunteers while managing my existing responsibilities at the library and home. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt energized in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Each day brought new challenges that required creative problem-solving, professional communication, and the kind of strategic thinking that had been dormant during my years of focusing solely on domestic responsibilities. David's support was unwavering and somewhat surprising. He took on additional household responsibilities without complaint, encouraged me to accept invitations to work late when necessary, and showed genuine interest in the project's progress. "You're different when you're working on this," he observed, one evening as I spread fabric samples across our dining room table. "More alive, more yourself. I'd forgotten how much you light up when you're creating something beautiful." The children were equally supportive, proud to tell their friends that their mother was designing the new community center, offering their own opinions about color choices and furniture arrangements, with the serious consideration they'd learned to apply to adult conversations. Their enthusiasm reminded me that modeling passionate engagement with meaningful work was as important for their development as providing a stable home environment. But the most significant change was internal. As I navigated the challenges of managing a complex design project, I felt my confidence returning in waves. Each successful negotiation with a vendor, each creative solution to a budget constraint, each positive feedback from Margaret or the Community Center Board reinforced my sense of professional competence. I was remembering who I'd been before. Years of subtle criticism had convinced me to shrink myself to fit other people's expectations. The transformation wasn't limited to my professional identity. As my confidence grew in one area, it began to overflow into others. I found myself speaking up more assertively in family situations, making decisions without seeking extensive input from others, trusting my own judgment in ways I hadn't for years. The woman who had once absorbed Patricia's criticism and wondered if it contained truth was being replaced by someone who recognized manipulation when she encountered it and refused to internalize other people's issues as her own shortcomings. Helen Thompson noticed the change immediately during our weekly support group meetings. "You're carrying yourself differently," she observed during a session focused on rebuilding self-trust after psychological manipulation. "There's a strength in your posture, a clarity in your voice that wasn't there a few months ago. What's shifted for you?" Her question prompted me to articulate changes I'd felt but hadn't fully recognized. "I think I'm remembering who I am when I'm not constantly trying to avoid conflict or manage other people's emotions," I said, surprising myself with the directness of my response. For years, I measured my success by how little disruption I caused, how well I could anticipate and prevent other people's dissatisfaction. But working on this design project has reminded me that I have value beyond my ability to keep everyone else comfortable. The insight resonated throughout the group, sparking a discussion about how psychological manipulation often works by convincing targets that their worth depends entirely on the manipulator's approval. Several members shared their own experiences of rediscovering interests, talents, and aspects of their personalities that had been suppressed during periods of intense family dysfunction. As the community center project neared completion, I found myself facing an unexpected opportunity. Margaret mentioned that several other organizations in the region had heard about our work and were interested in hiring me for their own design projects. The prospect of building a sustainable freelance practice felt both thrilling and terrifying, representing a level of professional independence I hadn't considered possible just months earlier. "You don't have to decide right now," David said when I shared my conflicted feelings about expanding my design work. "But I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'll support it. I've seen how much this project has energized you, how much more confident and happy you've become. Our family is stronger when you're operating at full capacity, not when you're trying to make yourself smaller to fit some ideal of selfless motherhood." His words hit me with unexpected force because they represented such a complete reversal from the subtle discouragement I'd received about my career aspirations during our early marriage years. I realized then how much of that discouragement hadn't actually come from David, but from Patricia's constant commentary about working mothers and women who prioritized their own fulfillment over family sacrifice. Her influence had been so pervasive that I'd attributed her values to my husband without recognizing the distinction. The community center's grand opening exceeded everyone's expectations. The space I'd designed buzzed with activity as families explored different areas. Seniors settled into comfortable seating arrangements for conversations, and teenagers found spaces that felt welcoming rather than institutional. Watching people interact naturally and comfortably in the environment I'd created brought a satisfaction that transcended professional pride. Margaret pulled me aside during the evening's festivities to share feedback from community members and board directors. "People keep commenting on how welcoming and warm the space feels," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They're saying it feels like a place they want to spend time, not just somewhere they have to go for meetings or events. You've given us something special here, Jessica. This space is going to serve our community for decades." Her words validated something I'd always believed about good design, that physical environments profoundly impact human behavior and emotional well-being. Creating spaces that supported connection, comfort, and community engagement wasn't just aesthetic work. It was a form of service that contributed to the quality of people's daily lives. Remembering this sense of purpose and meaning in my professional work felt like reclaiming a fundamental part of my identity. But perhaps the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Lucas and Sophia approached me with proud expressions and a handmade card they'd created together. "We wanted to thank you for making such a beautiful place for our town," Sophia said with 6-year-old seriousness, "and for showing us that moms can do important work too." Their recognition of the broader lesson embedded in my professional re-engagement moved me more than any professional accolade could have. Standing in the bustling community center that evening, surrounded by neighbors enjoying the space I'd designed, supported by a husband who had learned to truly see and value me, accompanied by children who understood that their mother was a complete person with talents and aspirations beyond caregiving, I felt a sense of wholeness I hadn't experienced in years. The journey from that devastating night when I'd listened to Patricia's recorded attacks on my character to this moment of professional and personal triumph hadn't been linear or easy. It had required confronting uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, challenging patterns of behavior that had seemed normal, and rebuilding confidence that had been systematically undermined. But the woman standing in that community center was someone I recognized and respected. Someone who had learned to trust her own perceptions and value her own contributions. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, I found myself making a mental list of all the design projects I wanted to pursue, all the ways I could contribute to making public spaces more welcoming and functional. For the first time in years, I was thinking about the future with excitement rather than anxiety, planning professional goals rather than simply trying to avoid family conflict. The transformation Patricia had inadvertently catalyzed by attacking my relationship with my children had led me back to myself in ways I never could have anticipated. Her attempts to diminish me had ultimately forced me to recognize my own worth, to defend my value not just as a mother, but as a complete human being with talents, dreams, and contributions that extended beyond the domestic sphere. Walking home. Through Cedar Valley's quiet streets that night, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this place of strength and clarity. The road hadn't been easy, but it had led me back to a version of myself that I'd thought was lost forever, back to a life that felt authentic and purposeful rather than simply manageable. The success of the community center project opened doors I hadn't expected to find again. Within 2 weeks of the grand opening, I received inquiries from 3 different organizations about design consultations, each representing a different type of challenge and opportunity. The first came from a local pediatric dental office that wanted to create a less intimidating environment for anxious young patients. The second was from a retirement community seeking to redesign their common areas to encourage more social interaction among residents. The third, and most intriguing, came from the Cedar Valley School District, which was renovating their elementary school library and wanted to create a space that would inspire children to develop a lifelong love of reading. Each project represented not just professional opportunity, but a chance to apply design principles in service of human well-being, something that had always been my deepest motivation as a designer. The pediatric office needed colors and layouts that would calm rather than overwhelm, with child-sized spaces that felt safe and engaging. The retirement community required furniture arrangements that facilitated conversation while accommodating mobility challenges, with lighting and acoustics that supported both group activities and individual pursuits. The school library demanded durability and flexibility while creating an atmosphere of wonder and discovery that would compete with digital distractions for children's attention. David's response to these opportunities surprised me with its wholehearted enthusiasm. Instead of expressing concern about how increased work demands might affect our family routine, he immediately began brainstorming ways to restructure our household responsibilities to accommodate my growing practice. "We need to get you proper office space," he said, examining the design materials that had once again taken over our dining room table, "and maybe some help with the house and kids, so you can focus on building your business properly." His suggestion to hire household help struck me as both practical and symbolically significant. For years, I'd worn my ability to manage all domestic responsibilities as a badge of honor, proof that I was a capable wife and mother who didn't need outside assistance. But I was beginning to understand that this perfectionist approach had been another form of self-limitation, a way of ensuring that I remained too busy and tired to pursue other aspirations that might challenge the family dynamics that Patricia had worked so hard to establish. The decision to hire Maria Santos, a warm and efficient housekeeper who came highly recommended by several families in our neighborhood, felt like crossing a threshold into a different version of adult life. Maria's presence twice a week freed up mental and physical energy that I hadn't realized I'd been expending on tasks that, while necessary, didn't require my specific talents or training. More importantly, it demonstrated to Lucas and Sophia that their mother's professional work was valuable enough to warrant investment and support. My first meeting with Dr. Sarah Kim at the pediatric dental office revealed the complexity of creating healing environments for children who had already developed negative associations with medical settings. Dr. Kim had taken over the practice from a retiring dentist whose office featured the kind of sterile white decor that made even adults feel anxious. Her vision was to create a space that felt more like a welcoming playroom than a medical facility, but she was struggling with the practical constraints of medical equipment and hygiene requirements. "I want children to actually look forward to coming here," she explained as we walked through the cramped waiting area filled with uncomfortable plastic chairs and outdated magazines. Most of my young patients are already terrified before they walk through the door. I need this space to communicate safety and fun from the moment they arrive. Her passion for creating positive experiences for children resonated deeply with my own recent focus on protecting young people from environments that diminished their sense of security and self-worth. The design solution I developed incorporated elements of nature and play while maintaining the clinical standards required for medical practice. Soft, curved seating arrangements created intimate conversation areas where parents and children could feel comfortable during waiting periods. Interactive wall displays featuring local wildlife engaged children's curiosity, while educational content helped demystify dental procedures in age-appropriate ways. Color choices were deliberately calming, with warm blues and greens that suggested water and growing things rather than the harsh whites and grays typical of medical environments. But the most innovative element was a sensory pathway that led from the waiting area to the treatment rooms, featuring different textures and gentle sounds that helped children transition gradually from the social space of the waiting room to the more intimate setting where they would receive care. The pathway included opportunities for children to make choices about their environment, such as selecting background music or adjusting lighting levels, giving them a sense of control that counteracted the vulnerability inherent in medical situations. Dr. Kim's response to the completed design exceeded my most optimistic expectations. "You've created something magical here," she said during our final walkthrough. "This doesn't feel like a medical office at all, but somehow it still feels completely professional and clean. More importantly, the children who've been here since the renovation seem genuinely excited to return. Parents are telling me their kids ask when they can come back to see their teeth cleaned." Her feedback confirmed my belief that thoughtful design could transform experiences that were typically sources of stress into opportunities for positive engagement. The retirement community project presented different challenges but similar opportunities to use design in service of human connection and well-being. Garden Vista Retirement Community had been built in the 1980s with a focus on efficiency and easy maintenance rather than social interaction or aesthetic appeal. The common areas featured institutional furniture arranged in rigid rows, harsh, fluorescent lighting that flattered no one, and color schemes that seemed designed to depress rather than uplift the spirits of residents dealing with the challenges of aging. My initial meetings with the facility director, Robert Johnson, and several resident representatives revealed the depth of dissatisfaction with the current environment. "People come here for community, but the spaces don't encourage conversation or connection," explained Eleanor Martinez, a retired teacher who had become an informal spokesperson for resident concerns. "We end up retreating to our individual apartments because the common areas feel more like hospital waiting rooms than places where you'd want to spend time with friends." Eleanor's observation about retreating to private spaces rather than engaging in community life struck me as particularly relevant to my own recent experience. For years, I'd withdrawn from social situations and community involvement, partly because the environments where these activities took place felt unwelcoming or uncomfortable. Creating spaces that actively encouraged human connection required understanding not just aesthetic principles, but psychological and social dynamics that influenced how people chose to spend their time and energy. The design solution I developed for Garden Vista focused on creating multiple types of social spaces to accommodate different personality types and activity preferences. Instead of one large room with institutional seating, I proposed several smaller areas with distinct personalities: a library corner with comfortable reading chairs and warm lighting for quiet individual activities, a game area with tables sized for card games and puzzles, a conversation pit with soft seating arranged to facilitate small group discussions, and an activity zone with flexible furniture that could accommodate everything from exercise classes to crafting sessions. Lighting played a crucial role in transforming the atmosphere from institutional to residential. I replaced harsh overhead fluorescents with a combination of ambient, task, and accent lighting that could be adjusted throughout the day to support different activities and energy levels. Table lamps and floor lamps created pools of warm light that made the space feel more like a comfortable living room than a commercial facility. Color choices were carefully researched and tested with resident focus groups to ensure they would enhance rather than overwhelm aging eyes, while creating an atmosphere of warmth and vitality. Rich burgundies and deep blues provided sophisticated backdrops for furniture and artwork, while strategic use of lighter colors prevented the space from feeling too dark or closed in. The result was an environment that felt both elegant and comfortable, honoring the residents' adult status while accommodating their practical needs. The transformation of the Garden Vista common areas had effects that extended far beyond aesthetics. Within weeks of the renovation's completion, Robert Johnson reported increased participation in community activities, more spontaneous social interactions, and higher overall satisfaction scores in resident surveys. "People are actually choosing to spend time in the common areas now," he told me during a follow-up visit. "We're seeing residents who had become quite isolated beginning to engage with their neighbors again. The space is encouraging the kind of community building that we always hoped for but struggled to achieve." Eleanor Martinez became one of my most enthusiastic advocates, sharing photos of the renovated spaces with her extensive network of friends and family members who were dealing with their own retirement community choices. "You've given us our dignity back," she said during our final meeting. "This place finally feels like somewhere we chose to live rather than somewhere we ended up by default." Her words captured something essential about the relationship between physical environment and psychological well-being that I'd always understood intuitively, but was learning to articulate professionally. The elementary school library project proved to be the most complex and rewarding of my new commissions. Working with librarian Janet Williams and Principal Michael Torres, I faced the challenge of creating a space that would compete with smartphones, tablets, and gaming systems for children's attention while serving multiple functions throughout the school day. The existing library was a testament to outdated approaches to children's learning environments. Long rows of identical tables, harsh fluorescent lighting, and book displays that made literature seem as appealing as homework assignments. Janet's vision for the space was both ambitious and practical. "I want children to see this library as a destination, not just a requirement," she explained during our initial consultation. "A place where they discover that books can be as engaging as any screen, where reading becomes associated with comfort and choice rather than obligation." Her understanding of the psychological barriers that prevented many children from developing positive relationships with books informed every aspect of the design process. The solution I developed transformed the traditional library layout into a series of themed learning environments that could accommodate different learning styles and social preferences. A storytelling amphitheater with graduated seating encouraged group activities and presentations, while providing excellent acoustics for reading aloud. Individual reading nooks with comfortable seating and adjustable lighting offered quiet spaces for children who preferred solitary engagement with books. Collaborative work areas with movable furniture supported group projects and peer tutoring activities. Technology integration was crucial but carefully balanced to enhance rather than replace traditional literacy experiences. Interactive displays showcased student book reviews and reading achievements, while digital catalog systems were designed to be intuitive for young users without overwhelming the space with screens. The key was creating an environment where technology served the goals of literacy and learning, rather than competing with them for attention. The most innovative aspect of the library design was a flexible central area that could be reconfigured throughout the day to support different activities. Lightweight, stackable furniture allowed teachers to quickly transform the space from individual reading time to group instruction to author presentations. Color-coded storage systems made it easy for students to participate in setup and cleanup, fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility for their learning environment. Janet's response to the completed library exceeded even my own expectations for the project. "You've created something that serves every type of learner we have," she said, as we watched students navigate the space during their first week in the renovated facility. Shy children are finding quiet corners where they feel safe to explore new books, while social learners are collaborating naturally in the group areas. Most importantly, children are asking to spend their free time here rather than treating library visits as something they have to endure. The impact on student behavior and achievement was measurable within the first month of operation. Circulation statistics showed a significant increase in voluntary book checkouts, while teachers reported improved engagement during library instruction time. Parent feedback indicated that children were talking about books at home more frequently and expressing interest in visiting public libraries during weekends and holidays. But the most meaningful feedback came from the students themselves. During a follow-up visit, I overheard a third grader explaining to her friend why she preferred doing homework in the library rather than at home. "It's quiet, but not lonely here. And all the books make me feel like I could learn anything I want to know." Her observation captured the essence of what I'd hoped to achieve: an environment that supported both individual growth and community learning while inspiring curiosity and confidence. The success of these 3 projects established my reputation within Cedar Valley's professional community and led to referrals that extended my practice throughout the region. More importantly, each project reinforced my understanding of design as a tool for supporting human flourishing rather than simply creating beautiful spaces. The work felt meaningful in ways that transcended professional satisfaction, connecting me to a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for far too long. David's pride in my professional accomplishments was evident in ways both large and small. He began introducing me at social gatherings as my wife Jessica, the interior designer who's transforming spaces throughout the valley, rather than simply my wife Jessica. He took genuine interest in the details of my projects, asking thoughtful questions about design challenges and celebrating each successful completion. Most significantly, he began scheduling his own work commitments around my project deadlines, recognizing that my professional success required the same kind of support and accommodation that his career had always received. The children's response to my professional re-engagement was equally gratifying. Lucas began incorporating design concepts into his school art projects, showing a sophisticated understanding of how color and composition could influence emotional responses. Sophia developed a habit of critiquing public spaces we visited, offering suggestions for improvements that demonstrated remarkably mature thinking about human needs and spatial relationships. Both children seemed proud to have a mother whose work extended beyond the boundaries of our household, whose contributions were recognized and valued by the broader community. But perhaps the most significant change was in my own sense of identity and capability. The woman who had once absorbed Patricia's criticisms and wondered if they contained truth had been replaced by someone who trusted her own professional judgment and creative instincts. Each successful project reinforced my confidence, not just as a designer, but as a person whose ideas and efforts could make meaningful differences in other people's lives. Standing in the renovated school library one afternoon, watching children discover books with genuine excitement and engagement, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of professional fulfillment. Patricia's attempts to diminish my worth and undermine my relationship with my children had inadvertently forced me to rediscover strengths and capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed. Her manipulation had been intended to make me smaller, more dependent, less confident in my own perceptions and abilities. Instead, it had catalyzed a process of growth and self-discovery that had returned me to a version of myself I'd thought was lost forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had tried to convince my children that I was inadequate as a mother had ultimately pushed me toward becoming a more complete and confident version of myself, someone better equipped to model resilience, creativity, and professional engagement for Lucas and Sophia. In trying to break me down, Patricia had accidentally provided the catalyst for building me back up stronger than before. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, almost exactly 1 year after we had cut contact with Patricia. I was reviewing blueprints for a new healthcare facility project when David's name appeared on my caller ID, unusual because he rarely called during work hours unless there was an emergency involving the children. "Jess, you need to know that..." "My mother is in the hospital," he said without preamble, his voice strained with conflicted emotions. "She had a heart attack yesterday evening. Sarah called to let me know." Sarah was David's sister, who had maintained sporadic contact with us despite the family tensions surrounding Patricia's behavior. My first instinct was a complex mixture of concern and wariness. Despite everything that had happened, Patricia was still the grandmother of my children and David's mother. But I also felt the familiar tightening in my chest that accompanied any mention of her name, the automatic defensive response that months of peace hadn't entirely erased. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked, genuinely hoping for a positive answer, while also bracing myself for how this development might affect the stability we'd worked so hard to build. "The doctors say she's stable, but it was serious. She's asking to see Lucas and Sophia," David continued, and I could hear the weight of this request in his voice. "Sarah says she's been talking about how much she misses them, how much she regrets, the way things ended between our families." The manipulation was so predictable, it almost made me laugh, if it hadn't been so potentially destructive to the peace we'd built over the past year. Patricia was using a genuine medical crisis as an opportunity to reinsert herself into our family dynamic, banking on our compassion and the children's natural concern for their grandmother to override the boundaries we'd established for excellent reasons. "What do you think we should do?" David asked, and I could hear that he was genuinely seeking my input rather than simply informing me of a decision he'd already made. This deference to my judgment on family matters represented a fundamental shift in our marriage dynamics that I didn't take for granted. "I think we need to talk to Helen about this," I said, referring to our support group leader who had become an invaluable source of guidance during challenging situations. "And we need to consider what's actually best for Lucas and Sophia, not what feels most comfortable for the adults involved." That evening, after the children were in bed, David and I had one of the most honest conversations of our marriage about family loyalty, forgiveness, and the difference between compassion and enabling destructive behavior. David struggled with guilt about his mother's condition, wondering if the stress of being cut off from her grandchildren had contributed to her heart attack. I found myself wrestling with my own complicated emotions, genuine concern for Patricia's health alongside protective fury at what felt like another attempt to manipulate our family through crisis. "Part of me wonders if we were too harsh," David admitted, staring at his hands. "Maybe we could have found a way to maintain some relationship while setting better boundaries. Now she's lying in a hospital bed, and I can't help thinking about all the conversations we'll never have if something happens to her." His vulnerability opened space for my own conflicted feelings. "I don't want her to suffer or die, David, but I also can't forget that she systematically tried to destroy my relationship with our children. The recordings prove that her behavior wasn't accidental or misunderstood. It was calculated psychological abuse targeted at the most vulnerable members of our family." We decided to attend the next support group meeting before making any decisions about hospital visits or changing our established boundaries. Helen Thompson's guidance had been invaluable throughout our healing process, and this situation was too complex and emotionally charged to navigate without professional insight. The Patin support group's response to our dilemma was both compassionate and clear-eyed. Several members shared similar experiences with family members who had used medical crises or other emergencies to breach boundaries that had been established for legitimate safety reasons. The consensus was that genuine emergency situations didn't automatically negate the reasons boundaries had been created in the first place. "Illness doesn't transform an abusive person into a safe person," Helen observed during our discussion. "Patricia's heart attack is a medical crisis that deserves compassion and appropriate response, but it doesn't erase the documented pattern of psychological manipulation that led to your family's decision to limit contact." Helen's words helped clarify the distinction between responding to Patricia's medical needs with appropriate concern while maintaining the boundaries that protected our children from further emotional harm. We could acknowledge her condition and hope for her recovery, without automatically returning to relationship dynamics that had proven harmful to Lucas and Sophia. After extensive discussion with Helen and careful consideration of the children's emotional well-being, David and I decided to visit Patricia in the hospital ourselves before making any decisions about involving Lucas and Sophia. We needed to assess her condition and, more importantly, her attitude about the family conflict that had led to our estrangement. The Patricia we found in the cardiac care unit was physically diminished but emotionally unchanged. Despite being connected to monitors and appearing genuinely fragile, her first words to us were complaints about how long it had taken us to visit and accusations that we had been cruel to keep her grandchildren away during her health crisis. "I could have died without ever seeing Lucas and Sophia again," she said, her voice weak but her tone as manipulative as ever. "What would you have told them then? That Grandma Patricia died alone because their parents were too stubborn to forgive? A few mistakes?" The characterization of her behavior as a few mistakes, rather than systematic psychological abuse, revealed that Patricia had learned nothing from our year of separation. She showed no genuine understanding of why her actions had been harmful, no accountability for the pain she had caused, and no insight into how her manipulation had damaged not just my relationship with my children, but their sense of security and self-worth. David's response to his mother's manipulation was markedly different from his previous patterns of avoidance and conflict prevention. "Mom, you weren't kept away because of stubbornness or lack of forgiveness," he said calmly but firmly. "You were kept away because you were systematically undermining Jessica's relationship with our children and causing them psychological harm. We have recordings of you telling Lucas and Sophia that their mother didn't love them, that she was lazy and inadequate. That's not grandparent guidance. That's emotional abuse." Patricia's reaction was immediate and predictable. She became tearful, claiming that we were misunderstanding her words and intentions, that she had only been trying to help the children develop realistic expectations about life. When tears didn't produce the desired response, she shifted to anger, accusing me of poisoning David against her and using the children as weapons in a petty family dispute. "You've turned my son against me," she said, her voice gaining strength as her fury mounted. "You've destroyed our family because you can't handle honest feedback about your parenting. Those children need structure and guidance, not coddling and permissiveness." The conversation that followed was unlike any interaction I'd ever had with Patricia. Instead of absorbing her criticism and wondering if it contained truth, I responded with the confidence and clarity I'd developed over the past year of personal growth and professional success. "Patricia, your feedback wasn't honest guidance. It was deliberate manipulation designed to undermine my authority as a mother and damage my children's sense of security," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "You told a 6-year-old that her mother didn't love her. You told an 8-year-old that his mother was lazy and that's why his father worked late. Those weren't parenting suggestions, they were psychological attacks on children." For the first time in our relationship, Patricia seemed genuinely surprised by my directness and strength. She had expected to encounter the same anxious, self-doubting woman who had previously absorbed her criticism and tried desperately to earn her approval. Instead, she found someone who recognized her manipulation tactics and refused to be intimidated by her emotional theatrics. David's support during this confrontation was unwavering. When Patricia attempted to triangulate by appealing to him against me, he consistently redirected the conversation back to her inappropriate behavior toward the children. When she tried to minimize her actions or reframe them as misunderstood kindness, he referenced specific examples from the recordings that demonstrated the calculated nature of her manipulation. "The woman who raised me wouldn't have told her grandchildren that their mother didn't love them," David said, his voice heavy with sadness and disappointment. "I don't know if you've changed or if I just never saw this side of you before, but I won't allow my children to be exposed to behavior that damages their emotional well-being." The hospital visit lasted less than an hour, but it provided crucial clarity about Patricia's unchanged attitudes and continued potential for harm. She showed no genuine remorse for her actions, no understanding of why they had been inappropriate, and no commitment to different behavior in the future. Instead, she maintained her position as a victim of our unreasonable expectations and harsh judgment. That evening, David and I sat with Lucas and Sophia to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms. We told them that Grandma Patricia was in the hospital with heart problems and that we hoped she would recover fully. We also explained that her medical condition didn't change the reasons we had limited her contact with our family, and that we wouldn't be bringing them to visit until we were confident that such visits would be emotionally safe for them. "Is Grandma Patricia going to say mean things about you again if we see her?" Sophia asked with the directness that children often bring to complex adult situations. "We don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "But our job as your parents is to make sure you're safe and that people treat you with kindness and respect. If Grandma Patricia can't do that, then we need to protect you from situations that might make you feel bad about yourselves or confused about our family." Lucas, with his 8-year-old wisdom, nodded thoughtfully. "I hope she gets better from being sick, but I don't miss feeling bad after she visited us. I like how peaceful our house is now." His observation captured something profound about the transformation our family had undergone during the year of Patricia's absence. The constant underlying tension that had characterized our household during her regular visits had been replaced by a sense of security and harmony that benefited everyone, especially the children. Over the following weeks, as Patricia recovered from her heart attack, she made several attempts to re-establish contact through cards, gifts, and messages sent through extended family members. Each communication followed the same pattern: expressions of love for the grandchildren combined with subtle accusations about our cruelty in keeping them away, offers to start fresh that avoided any acknowledgement of past behavior, and emotional manipulation designed to make us feel guilty for maintaining protective boundaries. David's sister Sarah became increasingly persistent in her efforts to broker reconciliation, unable to understand why we couldn't simply move past what she characterized as typical family drama. "She's an old woman who made some mistakes," Sarah argued during a particularly tense phone conversation. "Surely you can forgive her and let the children see their grandmother before it's too late." The pressure from extended family members was intense and emotionally exhausting. Many of them had never witnessed Patricia's manipulative behavior directly, and found it difficult to believe that a grandmother could systematically work to undermine a mother's relationship with her own children. Our refusal to participate in what they saw as normal family reconciliation made us appear stubborn and unforgiving, but the support group had prepared us for this phase of the process. Helen had warned us that maintaining boundaries often became more difficult when extended family members and social acquaintances pressured us to prioritize harmony over safety, particularly when the person being protected from was elderly or ill. Boundary maintenance is not about punishment or revenge, Helen reminded us during a particularly challenging session. It's about creating conditions that allow healthy relationships to flourish while preventing further harm. Patricia has shown no acknowledgement of her inappropriate behavior or commitment to change. Exposing your children to her manipulation again simply because she's recovered from a heart attack wouldn't serve anyone's genuine well-being. The turning point came 6 months later, when Patricia made one final attempt to circumvent our boundaries by showing up unexpectedly at Lucas's school, claiming to be picking him up for a dentist appointment. The school's protocol required them to verify such arrangements with parents, and they called me immediately when Patricia couldn't provide authorization for the pickup. The incident was terrifying in its implications. Patricia had researched Lucas's school schedule, learned the pickup procedures, and attempted to remove him from school without permission from his parents. When questioned by school administrators, she claimed there had been a misunderstanding, and that she was sure we would want her to take Lucas to an important medical appointment that we had apparently forgotten about. The school principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, was professional but clearly concerned about the incident. "We take unauthorized pickup attempts very seriously," she said when I arrived to collect Lucas myself. Mrs. Martinez seemed genuinely confused about whether she had permission, but she also seemed very determined to take Lucas with her. "We'll need to update our files to specify that she's not authorized for pickup under any circumstances." Lucas's account of the encounter was both heartbreaking and revealing. "Grandma Patricia told me that you and Dad had asked her to take me to the dentist, but it felt wrong," he said as we drove home. "She kept saying that you would explain everything later, but I remembered what you taught me about trusting my feelings when adults say things that don't make sense." His ability to recognize manipulation and trust his instincts despite pressure from an adult authority figure demonstrated the emotional intelligence and self-protection skills that our year of healing and boundary setting had helped him develop. Instead of being vulnerable to Patricia's manipulation, he had become resistant to it through understanding and practice. The school incident forced us to take legal action to protect our family. We obtained a restraining order that prohibited Patricia from contacting us or the children directly, from approaching their school or activities, and from attempting to communicate through third parties. The process was emotionally difficult, but necessary to establish clear legal boundaries that supplemented the personal ones we had been maintaining. David's decision to support the restraining order marked the final stage of his transformation, from someone who avoided family conflict to someone who actively protected his children from harm. "I can't believe my mother tried to take Lucas from school without permission," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "There's no innocent explanation for that behavior. She was trying to circumvent our authority as parents and manipulate an 8-year-old child into going with her under false pretenses." The legal documentation of Patricia's inappropriate behavior provided validation for family members who had previously questioned our decision to maintain strict boundaries. Even Sarah, who had been our harshest critic, acknowledged that attempting to remove a child from school without parental permission crossed a line that couldn't be ignored or excused. As I sit here today, 2 years after discovering those first recordings on Lucas's tablet, I'm struck by how profoundly our family has been transformed by the crisis that initially felt so devastating. The woman who once absorbed criticism and doubted her own perceptions has been replaced by someone who trusts her instincts and protects her family with fierce clarity. The marriage that was once characterized by avoidance and accommodation has become a partnership based on mutual respect and shared commitment to our children's well-being. Lucas and Sophia have grown into confident, emotionally intelligent children who understand that they deserve to be treated with kindness and respect, even by family members. They've learned that setting boundaries isn't mean or selfish, but necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. Most importantly, they've seen their parents model the kind of strength and mutual support that will serve them well in their own future relationships. My design practice has flourished beyond my wildest expectations, with projects throughout the region and a growing reputation for creating spaces that truly serve human needs. The professional confidence I've rebuilt has strengthened every aspect of my life, from parenting decisions to marriage dynamics to community involvement. But perhaps the most significant change is internal. The constant anxiety and self-doubt that characterized my life during Patricia's active manipulation have been replaced by a deep sense of peace and purpose. I no longer question my worth as a mother, or wonder if criticism contains truth that I'm too defensive to acknowledge. I trust my perceptions, value my contributions, and maintain relationships that enhance rather than diminish my sense of self. The recordings that Lucas and Sophia made were intended to document truth that adults were failing to acknowledge. In doing so, they became catalysts for transformation that extended far beyond their original purpose. They forced us to confront patterns of manipulation that might have continued for years, damaging not just my relationship with my children, but their fundamental sense of security and self-worth. Standing in my beautiful home office this morning, reviewing plans for a new children's hospital project that will serve families throughout our region, I'm filled with gratitude for the journey that brought me to this place of strength and purpose. Patricia's attempts to diminish me ultimately forced me to rediscover my value, to reclaim my voice, and to build a life that authentically reflects my capabilities and dreams. The woman who was once abandoned in Italy by her husband discovered unexpected strength in foreign soil. Similarly, the woman who was systematically undermined by her mother-in-law discovered that adversity could become the foundation for unprecedented growth and empowerment. Sometimes the cruelest actions yield the greatest gifts, not because cruelty is beneficial, but because surviving it reveals strength we never knew we possessed. Our family's story continues to unfold, but it now does so from a foundation of mutual respect, clear boundaries, and unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. The children who once bore witness to adult dysfunction through secret recordings now live in a home where their voices are heard, their feelings are validated, and their future is bright with possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.